Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why we're seeing such a high increase over 2020 is the fact that um, the pent-up travel demand is very real. I think that people are coming out of the pandemic with a increased amount of vacation days that they just kind of banked because they weren't traveling in throughout 2020.
What's up, everybody? My name's Mike Sjogren, here with my co-host,
Emmanuel Pani.
We're part of a group of specialized real estate investors you've probably never heard of.
We didn't start with deep pockets or wealthy families, and we don't rely on 401ks, mutual funds, or traditional real estate investing.
In fact, many of us don't even own the properties that fund our freedom. If you ask the money experts out there, they'd say what we do is impossible, yet it's happening every single day.
It's happening through a new niche called short-term rentals.
We are Short-Term Rental Nation, and these are our secrets. What's going on, STR Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Short-Term Rental Secrets podcast. I'm your host, Mike Sjogren, here with my main man and brother from another mother, Mr. Emmanuel Pani. What's up, E?
My brother, so good to see you. It's a Monday show, which is nice. Had an amazing weekend. Watched some Formula One yesterday. I don't know if there's any Formula One fans in our ranks, but if you don't know who Lewis Hamilton is, he had the race of a lifetime yesterday. He came up like 20 spots in the last 2 days. Absolutely amazing. And I just love, I have realized with time that what I love is just watching all the pros, like the highest of best in all the fields are just so amazing to watch. Because you'd literally see all the years of work and dedication and F1, man, it's you have to be really, really concentrated for a really, really long time, 71 laps, and you realize dude, I wonder if they meditate. I wonder what you do, how do you, and some days, somebody crashes and you have to drive by him and then just keep racing. I would just be okay, we're done for the day. I am feeling quite scared today after I just saw this guy's car catch fire. So maybe we shouldn't do this for today. It doesn't seem like a good day, but I guess you can do that over there. But we are in the midst of launching the unit, like we talked about last week. We're pretty much done. As we've been talking about, just a bit of a hiccup with just getting everything in time. So some stuff are coming sooner, some stuff are coming later, but we're almost done. And then at our local meetup, I met an amazing connection for you, which I was super excited about. As you guys know, we like to speak our existence into reality. And we talked about the show last week, how Mike wanted to make some unique rooms at his new place in Orlando. And I met somebody out of the blue that came to our real estate meetup that does that. It helps people and creates some amazing rooms. So I don't know.
Next level.
Next level rooms.
Had a stormtrooper machine bed that actually moved and shot lasers. It was next level. So
I was really excited for that, and it just reminds me of just the power of networking and kind of speaking what you do into existence and not being a secret agent, whatever your job, whatever you're trying to get into. Because if I didn't talk about Mike and how excited I was, just randomly bragging about your friends that he bought a 10-room place up in Orlando, I would have never get to know that this is what this guy did. So, yeah, man, life is good.
Yeah, same honestly with our guest today, who I put 2 and 2 together after the fact that we connected a month or two ago on another webinar that we did together. But same thing. It was now we're getting into Q4, starting to look at, the end of the year, holiday bookings, 2022, and thinking through, who has some good perspective on what they're seeing for trends and things like that. So today on the show, we've got Paul Zukauskas with us today. He's the Global VP of Customer Success with Guesty. And for those of you guys that have been listening for a while, we talk about Guesty quite a bit. They're a huge property management platform. They integrate with about everything on the planet that I have found, and I like using them in our business. He combines his passion for real estate and hospitality by helping top vacation rental hospitality brands grow and scale. He's passionate with client services, and he's got over 10 years of SaaS management experience leading high-performing customer success, implementation, and support teams. And he is here today to share his experience and what he's seeing from different market trends at his high level over at Guesty. So Paul, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Thanks for having me, Emmanuel.
Absolutely. So before we get into all the good nitty gritty about market trends, how did you end up at Guesty? Like, how did you end up in like the whole hospitality space? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I think my story probably follows a similar curve to a lot of people that have joined Guesty, which is I was managing 2 Airbnbs on my own, and I kind of went online and I was like, someone should have a software for how I can add this to VRBO and Expedia and, advertise it all over the place. And then, first top line Google search, because Guesty's marketing team is amazing. Top line was Guesty. So I kind of looked into it, filed it away. And then, a few months later, as Kismet would be, a recruiter had reached out to me about an opportunity with Guesty. And I already had like the perfect kind of research done for the entire like interview process and everything. And I just knew, based on my personal experience and how much I loved being kind of a short-term rental operator, although really small in size. And then given my kind of, expertise in leading customer-facing teams across SaaS platforms, it just kind of really came together, and the rest is kind of history for me.
So
That's
did the recruiter know you had Airbnbs, or he was expecting just from your software background and you just like, oh, let me tell you what I think about Guesty as a user? And he's like, oh man, I've got more than I bargained for. Now I actually have a guy that has used our platform and had no idea.
Yeah, I never actually used Guesty because, we really target kind of short-term rental companies with 5 or more listings. So I didn't have that direct experience with Guesty or any kind of real PMS. They just reached out to me out of the blue. They had no idea that I was like an Airbnb, host or anything like that. And so I think the recruiter got really excited when she learned that I had that experience, because she was like, oh, this is a perfect match type of thing.
And like, I can't help it. I would have absolutely geeked out and be like, it's a sign of fate. I would have definitely called Mike if they happened in my life and be like, Mike, you can't believe what just happened. Guesty called me out of the blue. Because like, to me, that can be out of the blue. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way life is. Like, how perfect is that?
You know what it is? So not to get too far into the weeds, but my mother-in-law is like big into like Eastern medicine and kind of like these like signs and things like that. And so she always does these things that in Lithuanian we refer to as mandala, where if you want something out there in the world, like the right job for you, she would like draw you like a specific kind of like pictogram type of thing, and then you'd carry it around like behind your phone. And then over the course of time, these things would just naturally come to us, right? And so I believe at that time she knew that I was looking for work, and so I think she drew a mandalas for me for the perfect situation to kind of unveil itself, and it did, which is so.
And here we are.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, you were saying, speak it into existence in the open.
Yeah.
This was just an example of that.
Wow, love it.
So I don't want to steal your thunder, but Andrew was kind enough to send over some data. If I want to just read it over real quick, and then we can get into some of the trends, as far as like what we're seeing or what you guys are seeing for the upcoming holiday season. Mm-hmm. So just some bullets that Andrew was kind enough to pass on. He said, Thanksgiving weekend reservation volume is up by 302% compared to 2020 and 93% higher than 2019. So it's not just the COVID thing, like even compared to 2019, it's up 93%. Average nightly rate is 19% higher than last year. It's at about $415 per night. 2020 was $349 a night for context. And it's 58% higher than 2019, which was $263 a night. Top 5 states being booked for Thanksgiving are Texas, Florida, Nevada, Louisiana, and Michigan. Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed Louisiana or Michigan, but that's interesting.
Michigan, I suspect, because there's a lot of larger markets around Michigan. There's this whole Chicago crowd that's kind of heading up to northwest or southwest Michigan. Got a lot of cityscapers in like Detroit and Ann Arbor that are coming up, probably folks from Indianapolis. I'm from the Midwest, and so I know how much of a kind of draw Michigan is, and it really fits the target demographic of what people are searching for as far as these kind of remote, isolated, kind of large format homes that kind of celebrate their entire family kind of coming together. So
that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And then again, he's got a bunch of different stats as well. Around Christmas time, reservations are up 469% compared to 2020. So, I mean, things are just exploding right now. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely want to touch on that and maybe some of the trends or different things that are making it stand out. But then kind of the elephant in the room that everybody keeps asking E and I is like, is this going to continue? Like, is it still going to keep projecting? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but with all the data that you're seeing in Guesty and all the different folks that you're working with, the big question is always like, will this continue or is it going to somehow flatline? Which personally, I don't think is going to flatline, but at some point it probably level off a little bit. But
Yeah.
Getting back to some of the trends for this season, I don't know if you want to share any other insights around that data, or in particular, like anything that you've noticed that people are doing differently this year that are driving those bookings or to help them stand out for those bookings.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why we're seeing such a high increase over 2020 is the fact that the pent-up travel demand is very real. I think that people are coming out of the pandemic with a increased amount of vacation days that just kind of banked because they weren't traveling throughout 2020. Also, there's this attitude of, I'm not going to wait another year to get together with my family. I'm not going to, we've already done this for a year. We've got the vaccine out there, and I think that a lot of people, obviously, wherever they stand, there's a lot of people that are vaccinated right now, and they feel comfortable kind of getting together with their remote families. And so we're seeing that in this huge increase over the 2020 data, as you're indicating, 300% increase over Thanksgiving, 470% increase over Christmas. And so the travelers are definitely out there because of the pent-up demand. Why we're seeing an increase over 2019 numbers, though, is the fact that we see from Guesty's point of view that short-term rentals have really gone more mainstream. I cited this, I think, in a webinar that I did for Guesty maybe earlier this week or last week. I can't remember. It all comes together. But when you're looking at Airbnb, and there's a book out there by Geoffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm. And for anybody that's really into kind of tech and kind of the customer lifecycle journey in tech, what you can see, and if you compare it to Airbnb, is that prior to the pandemic, Airbnb had done a great job of capturing the early majority as far as people that are willing to take on the STR risk, right? And so traditionally, this is a younger crowd. This is somebody who's willing to actually try something new and kind of put their money down for a new experience. Because of the pandemic and because of kind of the crisis of staying within a hotel-like accommodation and kind of the close proximity to other guests, what this does is it fast-forwarded for the late majority to start accepting STR as a mainstream kind of accommodation for themselves. And so this is typically like your grandparents, or if you're a little bit older, your parents kind of saying, all right, we've heard about this Airbnb accommodation, this STR accommodation. Let's go ahead and give it a try. And because of the professionalization of all the hosts out there, they had a really positive experience. And so there's less of this apprehension, even though now you can go back to the hotel, there's less of this apprehension of the late majority to just naturally flow back into that hotel experience. They had such a positive, clean unit, great space kind of experience with the STR that they experienced in sometime in 2021 that they're willing to go back to it. And that's why we're seeing kind of this increase over 2020 or over 2019 saw there in the holidays.
What was the book called that you talked about?
Crossing the Chasm, written by Geoffrey Moore.
I have it over
That's
here
funny.
somewhere. I was going to grab it, but I didn't want to take too long.
Yeah, but it's funny because I've heard a similar argument about why cryptocurrency has exploded in the recent year. Okay. Is the fact that there was and it's funny because I literally just heard it a couple of days ago. I was at a dinner and somebody brought up, and similar the same book, but I didn't know him as well. So I'm like, I didn't want to be like, what was that book again? But it's a similar concept, is the fact that like at the beginning, just the people that are super techie or super aware use something, but then you get to that like critical mass almost. It's like once you cross the critical mass, it becomes a lot different. And that's definitely what we're seeing. And we've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah. And one of the ways that you could actually see it kind of numerically or analytically is just by looking at the Airbnb numbers, right? Because now they're a public company. It's basically open kimono. You can start seeing actually the reservation volume, how many first-time users they've got on the platform and everything. And this really reflects kind of that parabolic curve of the late majority starting to take over into the STR space.
One of the things that you touched on that we've talked about ad nauseum on this is the professionalization of the industry, right? And so people ask me all the time, and we'll get into like 2022 and beyond about like, what do I see coming? And I always say the same thing, that the bar is just going to keep getting raised as far as how you operate your units, how you design your units, like the customer experience. That bar is just going to keep getting elevated as more and more professional operators come into the market, because the demand I don't see going away, but the competition that you're going to have is going to keep increasing, because now they've stayed. Now maybe more of them are going to want to host, right? And so there's more and more people that are going to want to host. You know, you can click on any YouTube or Instagram and there's ads everywhere for make all this money with Airbnb, which is true if you do it the right way. From what you're seeing, are you seeing, because like you said, Guesty tends to work with a lot more professional operators at scale. Are you seeing those numbers increasing as more and more people like are adding more units this year? Because it almost felt like 2020 people kind of flatlined or backed off a little bit. But are you guys seeing a lot more properties come online this year?
Oh yeah. And where we're seeing a majority of the growth is in our SMB segment. And so typically, for those that don't know, SMB stands for small to medium business. And so we classify our SMB segment anywhere between, like 10 listings to around 25. And where we saw a natural progression, specifically for my department, in which we start taking mid-market plus accounts for coverage, is that these folks that had 20 listings more than doubled over 2021. And so I think because if you look at kind of real estate trends as well, a lot of people purchase second homes, and a lot of these second home purchases needed a short-term rental kind of operator to take over, because it's very difficult to, if you're in LA, to manage operations for one unit in, Big Bear or in the desert in Joshua Tree, which is where we saw a ton of this growth happening, was in these remote, desolate isolation, or, these remote locations. And so I think that the purchasing of the second homes brought on high growth in specifically the VR operators. Keep in mind that Guesty also accommodates for urban operators, and we didn't see as much growth there. Where predominantly we saw the growth was with the large enterprise, well-funded players that can kind of take the down occupancy and still raise money and start acquiring more units that way cheaper. But the VRs definitely blew up from 20 listings to about 45, 50. And I think that's where Guesty really played a huge part for them, was that they could focus more on their actual acquisition strategy and not have to staff and resource so much down on the operations, because they were able to automate a lot of their messages or have a very kind of clear like task, dashboard, and being able to handle or manage a lot of their operational needs through Guesty. So they just threw all their emphasis on sales and marketing and making sure that they were creating awareness within their niche markets to kind of acquire more and more inventory.
For sure.
I wonder, right? If you have, let's say that we have a listener that is in that 3 to 4 unit range and is kind of thinking maybe they're still doing everything on Airbnb, and they have Airbnb and VRBO linked together, sure, and they want to come to Guesty or invest in a property management software. What would you say to them is like the biggest advantage of actually making the investment into property management software sooner rather than later? Because I think a lot of people are in the mindset of like, I'll do this when I get here. And I think Mike and I always talk about create the vision of where you're going and start creating the infrastructure now, because it's easier to lay foundation when the house is not on top of it than it is for you to take down walls and add foundation later down the road. So where would you say like, hey, this is why you really should be doing this, because this is the main advantages that you're going to have?
Yeah. The timing of your question couldn't be better, actually, because today Guesty just released a new offering, which is called Guesty for Host. And really what it's doing is targeting those people with anywhere between 2 and 5 listings. And it's a pared down kind of version of Guesty, where it's mobile first, and where it's really operating more as kind of a unified inbox experience, as well as a multi-calendar that allows you to actually publish to multiple channels and get the strength of those integrations with some limited functionality. And so really, through the Guesty for Host, what you can do is you could start actually building your software stack, start learning a little bit how to manage the software component of your business. while you're also kind of managing the operations, and then slowly you can kind of grow together into the Guesty Pro platform. But to answer your question specifically, like why should you focus on your tech stack at 2 to 3 listings versus at 10, is that I think you alluded to it in your question, which is it's so much easier to build out your tech offering on just a few listings. And it's so much easier to manage what's working for you with your tech provider and what's not working for you across 2 to 3 listings. And so you're fine tuning and creating your expertise on a scale that's easy for you to manage. And should something not work properly, you could really quickly dial it back and then dive into whatever your process was prior to your tech solution, tweak it on the side, and then re-implement it. It's really hard if you're at 10 listings, 20 listings, and you're only now building out your tech stack. If you make some mistakes there, it's going to be they're going to be felt a lot more. There's going to be a lot more reverberations throughout your operations at scale versus learning kind of just with 2 or 3.
100%.
Yes, I asked that question very selfishly because like that was my problem, and that was what was so painful about implementing a new PMS software, because I did so with 40 units, 45 units. So creating even the just onboarding of it, it's physically painful, like especially for somebody like me that likes to stay high level and likes to do the sales and everything else. It was painful. And I know Mike might not admit it, but he also drove his team absolutely crazy onboarding and changing systems when you have a lot of units, because somebody got to do it. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's basically like learning a new language. Do you want to learn a new language when you're 5 years old or 6 years old, or do you want to learn it when you're 40 or 50, right? Like the data process, it's harder to learn when you the more you have on you.
So one of the things that you mentioned was all the different channels that Guesty integrates with. This is a selfish question, honestly, for me, but I think the listeners will get a lot of it. Have you seen any of these other more niche OTAs gain a lot of traction over the last 12 months? Yeah. And I think like the big ones we always talk about, like Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com, sometimes Expedia, it's a little more distant, but any other platforms that you've seen kind of really grow over the last 12 months? Yeah.
So what we see is certain platforms in certain regions really grow successfully, right? And so it's alternative accommodations, for instance, right? Let's say that you're offering glamping type of accommodations throughout the United States. There are specific glamping type of OTAs that are very well suited, where you will see a lot of your bookings come in from that kind of alternative accommodation. Also, if let's say you're in the Smoky Mountains, in, what is that, Tennessee? I believe that there's some OTAs that are specifically driving kind of blog-like activity, customer experience type of activity in the Smoky Mountains, and then they're coupling an OTA alongside of it. And so we're seeing a lot of those kind of smaller OTAs be specifically driving value to the listings in that area. But if you have inventory spread across the United States, for operations management kind of basis, I think it's easiest for you to stay on the primary kind of OTAs, the ones that you guys always talk about, which is Booking, VRBO, Airbnb, Expedia, and then we're starting to hear traction on Google. I feel like everybody's thinking that Google is going to be, the next major OTA player. We're connected to Google through Rentals United today, and honestly, we're not seeing the reservation traction that basically dictates the amount of interest that people have in that area right now. And so, but who knows what it's. Google moves fast, so it may be something really kind of take off in that area coming soon.
And by that, do you mean like when you look at a flight, how Google has Google Flights, so they're doing that for OTAs in travel, like how they have with hotels, or what do you mean by that?
I don't know the specifics around it, but the way that I imagine it working is that similarly, when you're going to like a booking.com and you're searching for an accommodation, you're going to have this mix of short-term rentals as well as hotels kind of mixed together. And then you're basically fighting in that same space for attention and occupancy.
Interesting.
But I'm sure that they'll have filters where you can specifically search for a vacation home or something that's a little bit more accommodating towards your search.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So if I'm following you, there's some more like niche traveler types or region specific types of OTAs, basically.
Yeah, and there's, as you probably know, there's thousands of them out there right now that are like, like holy traveling guests or something like that, places where people go to like the Vatican or something like that, and that's a dedicated OTA. I think that there's a lot to be said for partnering with a local OTA like that, because a rising tide lifts all boats in that community, essentially. And so if you're able to create more inventory there for that local OTA, then that'll drive more volume there, that'll drive more interest to your community, as well as kind of, whatever experiences are tied into that OTA. And so there's a ton of value with partnering with your local OTAs, as well as potentially negotiating lower rates, right? We all know that Airbnb and the other OTAs really take a high cut of the reservation. Some of these local OTAs are willing to take a little bit less.
Gotcha. As far as any other trends that you're seeing is, whether it's amenities or different things that certain listings are doing that seem to be doing better than others, anything else that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think what we saw in the middle of the pandemic, which may not be as pertinent today, was accommodating to this digital nomad. The person that no longer has to be working in an office in Philadelphia and that can escape to the Catskills or, go skiing in Aspen for a month. And so the way that people were marketing to these digital nomads, and the way that they were bolstering maybe some of their more remote locations with better Wi-Fi capabilities, or cannibalizing some rooms and turning them into an office. So if you had like a 3-bedroom home, instead you would turn it into a 2-bedroom with a large kind of office amenities with, multiple screens that people can use. And really kind of, how do you take this digital nomad and capture them a month at a time, so that you can really get these longer, prolonged, extended stays beyond just kind of the average of what we saw in the pandemic. Was the average stay had crept up to over 5 nights, where typically it's at 3.5. You're able to capture a digital nomad for 45, 60 day kind of stays. And so people really got creative in how they were marketing to that audience. So that was something. And then, I can see that trend continuing. But it's going to be very, very closely tied to what corporate, specifically here in the Americas, what is corporate America doing as far as, are they allowing more work remotely, or are they requiring kind of a back to the office approach?
Yeah, and this is just my own gut as like a business owner, but if I'm looking at my metrics and I'm seeing productivity and sales doing well and people aren't in the office and I'm got crazy office leases all over the place, probably a good indication that I could probably cut some office space, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, as a manager myself, you can start looking at some of the well-being and the health of the remote employee, where they're citing kind of higher burnout rates because people are on more, right? So you have to kind of level set expectations within the workforce of, you're remote now, but you shouldn't necessarily be on for 15, 20 hours a day to produce the results that you've been producing over the pandemic. It's not sustainable long term. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to find this balance, but that's completely off topic. So.
Yeah, have you guys seen that in Portugal, they actually passed a law that is illegal for a business owner to text his employees after business hours to ask them to work on anything?
That sounds like a good law to me. I'm a terrible, the people that work for me will know that I'm terrible at that, because I'll just send a Slack in the middle of the night because I'm thinking about something in there.
Yeah. No, and that's what my wife yells at me about all the time, because I text our team when I wake up. I'm like, I wake up at 4, I have a thought, and I'm like, here. And she's like, they're gonna, especially like since Joyce is in the Philippines, she's like, she's gonna see that. I'm like, yeah, but she should know that, like, she's been with us for like over 6 months now. She should know not to respond until 9. And then Joyce responds at like 6. I'm like, shit. Yep. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm so sorry. Like, don't worry about it. We'll talk at 9. like, you know. But yeah, so I would probably go to jail if we were in Portugal. They would just come and arrest me after like the first week, be like, you've broke this law so many times already. But yeah, man, I find it super interesting, and I love data. Like I've become a big fan of data. The numbers are real, and I think we've seen them. And I think the main advantage that we have moving forward is just what you talked about, is just the fact that it's becoming a well-known way to go travel and enjoy life. And I don't think, and especially with professional hosts, more and more professional hosts coming in, the quality of the experience is just going to keep getting better, in a way that I don't think hotels can match anymore, especially if you're looking to reconnect with family or friends, or just have, you know, a mastermind weekend or a weekend with friends that you haven't seen in a long time. The quality of the experience, it's so much better.
Yeah, I agree.
Switching gears slightly, or moving the lens out a little bit, have you guys started to notice anything for like Q1 2022 yet, as far as like how that's trending versus 2020? Or if people, again, getting back to that question of 2021 for most people was a record year.
Mm-hmm.
Is that trend going to continue through 2022, or do we think we're going to start seeing that level off a bit in 2022? Or is it too early to tell from the data that you guys have?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's still a little early to tell. The indication of the listing volume that we're seeing from our existing customer base speaks to the fact that we think that the trend of growth is going to continue into 2022. Traditionally, there is a little bit of a lull in January and in February as far as occupancy and reservations are concerned. And so I think it'll be very telling very early on for us of whether this trend is going to continue or not. And this has honestly been something that our investors and that investors in other kind of travel tech spaces have been asking of, is this just a wave that's going to crest and then we're going to fall back to 2019 kind of standardization? Or is this now the new norm, as you had indicated? And for whatever it's worth, because of the late majority, I really think this is the new norm. I think that there are more listings out there. There's more high quality stays. Airbnb talks about it all the time, that they need more and more inventory because the demand is so high. And so it's just a matter of whether we can keep up with that demand. And I don't think that 22 is necessarily the top of that plateau. I think that we've got a few more years left in us before we start seeing kind of a cap.
Gotcha.
Are you guys seeing a change? Sorry, Mike. Are you seeing a change in how far out people are booking, or are people going back? Because I remember like 2019, 2018, people were booking a lot farther ahead. And now I'm seeing some farther out booking, especially down here in Florida, but not too much as of yet. So I'm just curious to see like what you guys are seeing from your side on that.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is necessarily the booking window. And this is a metric that we track very carefully with our listings. And what we want to see is basically one of the first indicators to us of normalization following the pandemic was the booking window. Because as you had talked about, essentially the 60 plus day booking window, that went away completely. The 30 plus day stay was on a life support kind of trickle. And we saw this gigantic spike within the next 7 days type of bookings. What we've noticed is basically a trend back to the normalization of 2019. And we're essentially 100% back to that trend, just with a higher booking volume and greater occupancy and greater listing counts. And so people aren't necessarily booking out longer than they were before. They've gone back to booking within the same kind of cadence that they had booked prior to the pandemic. And so people are, obviously there are some holidays or some days that have huge booking window spikes, like Christmas, for instance. I think that because of the pent-up demand, the lack of inventory in some of these remote locations, we've seen an increase in that booking window, but essentially everything's gone back to normal.
Love it. Any other insights, any other tips that you want to share with the listeners before we get into some more last questions?
Uh, no, sorry, I think I'm lagging a little bit for you guys. Can you hear me?
You're good now. You were lagging for a minute there. I think we got you. We might need to lose the video.
Okay. All right. All right. Let me try this. All right. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Cool. The one thing that I did want to highlight was that we haven't talked about was corporate travel a little bit, and kind of what we're seeing in terms of corporate travel. It is not back the way that vacation travel is, but it is on the rise. And so what we're seeing is less frequency of corporate travel, but longer corporate travel type of stays. And a lot of companies, because of the remote kind of environment, have now accepted short-term rentals as being a acceptable accommodation for their corporate kind of setup. And so we are seeing loyalty programs within some of the larger, more urban players, and how they're now strategically partnering with some of the larger corporations to draw more corporate travel to them.
I love it. I love it. I was talking to Andrew from Guesty the other day, and he was like, "What other suggestions would you have?" And I said, "Figure out how to create some type of loyalty program inside of Guesty so that I can start creating some type of point system so that when people stay with us, we can get
figure out how
that
to point system.
Yeah, I think that that's going to be the next huge wave that we're going to see as far as kind of corporate travel is how do these larger STR players start creating that rewards program?
Love it. Love it. Well, before we get into the last question, first, I just want to thank you for being here and sharing all this knowledge with us, and for everything that you guys have built over at Guesty. I've said it multiple times. I'm a huge fan. Obviously, I'm a user. You guys have made my life a lot easier. So thank you for that. Truly appreciate all you guys do. Where can folks learn more about you and what Guesty has to offer for their business before we get into the last question?
Yeah, as far as Guesty, I urge you to go to kind of guesty.com. If you're looking for more information on Guesty, just go ahead and schedule kind of a demo. One of our account executives would be more than happy to kind of walk you through the platform. If you're one of those kind of 2 to 3 kind of listings players, still our Guesty for Host offering as well as the Guesty Pro offering, and you can kind of make a decision for yourself of which one's going to fit your needs best early on. And so more information on me specifically, reach out to LinkedIn, Paul Zukauskas, at LinkedIn. I don't even know what my URL is, but I'm sure a quick Google search will pull me up.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. The last question that we like to ask all of our guests, this will be an interesting perspective coming from you, is what is your number one secret to success with short-term rentals?
Yeah. What I think the players in our space that we've seen grow aggressively, something that they've been able to do is really focus and invest in on their operations and automation as much as possible, because hiring additional staff could be a very time-consuming activity as well as very expensive if you don't get it right. And so if you're able to kind of create as much of the automation around messaging or task management or financials, you're really going to enable yourself to focus on what is that special sauce of your organization and kind of really harness that for growth. And don't worry about the cleanings and the communications and all those other ancillary kind of mundane tasks.
Love it. Love it. Well, Paul, thank you again so much for being here with us. Truly appreciate having you on the show. And thank you again for everything that you and Guesty have done. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Bye, Paul. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
tuning in. We'll see you all next week on the Short-Term Rental Secrets podcast. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Hey, STR Nation, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. And in the comments, let us know what topics you want us to cover on upcoming episodes, and we'll make sure to get that in the books for you. And if you really want to learn how to launch, automate, and scale your short-term rental business, if you want to go deeper, then check out our free masterclass at strsecrets.com.